Okay, so starting with merger simulation. So you've probably seen, some of you have certainly done merger simulations. A merger simulation is a very ambitious thing to do. Okay, it's ambitious in a couple of senses. One is that it takes on the task of modeling the industry pre-merger and then modeling it again post-merger. And you might think, well, isn't that inherent in merger evaluation? And my answer is no. So please watch. You probably don't know how much water was in the bottle before I poured, and you don't know how much water is in the bottle after I poured, but you know there's less. You can beneficially focus on the change in some circumstances without having very much to say about the level, either pre or post. And it turns out, I think, that that's very important in doing analysis of especially unilateral effects from a merger. It's often easier and more reliable to gauge something about the change in incentives than it is to model all of the complicated incentives that are likely to be present in a real-world industry. Merger simulation fights against that by trying to model the levels, and that's a big ask.
I think we had some questions tweeted in this morning's panel. If we get that, I'll try and answer in 140 characters. I'm going to give a 10-year retrospective of price pressure analysis and merger simulation in the UK. So here's an overview. Because we've been using these tests for quite a long time in the UK, we've heard a lot of comment around the utility of these kind of tests. So my aim today really is to take that comment and characterize it, or some may say caricature it, into 4 different arguments. I'll try and then dispel those arguments and explain why I think, in spite of those arguments, price pressure analysis is really delivering on its promise. Before I do that, I'll give an overview of UK merger control and UPP, GUPPI, IPR, and PPI. So no, wait, it's all too easy. The argument here is, how can you possibly get good information about unilateral effects just by taking 2 things and multiplying them together? That's just too good to be true. And breaking that down, there are seem to be 2 different concerns, that the ingredients may be poorly measured. It's difficult to measure diversion ratios and margins, and I think that's true. But it's no more true of the ingredients of alphabet soup than it is of other types of economic evidence or other types of qualitative evidence. The fact is, we know it's hard to do this, and that's why we're circumspect about looking at this kind of evidence. That is not a reason not to look at this kind of evidence. There are lots of other different types of evidence that we know have measurement errors in them, firms' internal business documents. Who knows how they were produced? We attach weight to them. The fact that we know something is mismeasured is not a reason to ignore it. It's a reason to attach the appropriate level of weight to it. I sound a bit like Donald Rumsfeld here, talking about known unknowns and unknown unknowns. And the second criticism here is that the analysis requires lots of hidden and unrealistic assumptions. Essentially, if all you're doing is multiplying 2 things together, there must be a lot of work going on in the background that you can't see in order for you to get to that place. Okay, so it's true that there are assumptions. There are assumptions not just in economic models, not just in this model, but in all models, in all different disciplines, in all sciences, social sciences, natural sciences. They exist to do 2 things. They idealize and they neutralize. They idealize the relationship between the things you're interested in investigating, and they neutralize that relationship from the impact of things that don't matter. So here we know unilateral effects depend on diversion ratios and margins. And these models and this analysis gives us the simplest possible way of capturing that without being infected by things that don't matter. That's true just not only of price pressure analysis, but here's a more practical example that I hope will illustrate that point. Could you play the animation, please? So this is a map of the London Underground, the tube as we call it, the central zone. It's a bit out of date, it's from 2004, but it's a model. And it's a model that assumes that all underground train lines run north-south, east-west, or at 45 degrees. And it doesn't represent the distance between tube stations accurately at all. Does that make it a bad model? It's a brilliant model. It's been copied the world over. If you want to see how brilliant a model it is, I'll show you a less restrictive form of exactly the same model. Could you play the animation, please? That is a geographically correct version of the London Underground map, with the stations added. There's no way that is a better model than the first model I showed you, but it is a less restrictive model. And finally, here is the least restrictive version of this model that one can imagine. Could you play the animation again, please? That's adding a street map. Is that an easier model to use than the first model? No, it is not. Why is that? Well, as the guy who created the original map, whose name was Harry Beck, said in 1933, when you're underground, geography doesn't matter. Connections are the thing.